Good day to you. This tutorial will show you how you can deal damage to players with gadgets similar to being hit by a gun. First, what are we going to need to get gadgets to damage someone? You're most likely going to need a get stat chip, a combinator, and a set stat chip. And then anything that is able to get a player ID. A player ID is assigned to every single player when they join the room and helps identify the player via circuits. Next, we're going to need to configure our stat chips and the combinator that way they do what we want them to do. Thankfully, by default, when you spawn in the stat chip, you don't really need to configure it due to the fact that it automatically selects health. Here's the thing, you can also do this with any of the stats in the game, although again, for now, since we're damaging players, we're going to want to use the health stat. The same is also for the set. Next, what we're going to want to do is get the red pin on the trigger zone, so it gets the ID of whoever enters the zone. Example, if you have a spike pit, when you enter the spikes, we're going to wire this to the get stat chip. This is now going to get the HP stat of the player who enters. You can also set this to the player over here, that way the set stat chip knows whose HP stat is being set here. Next, what we're going to do is get the value from the get stat chip. This is essentially the health stat. What we're going to do is bring it over to the combinator. Also, I have this combinator configured to do subtraction, but you can also use addition. If I'm using addition and I want to damage the player, make sure you use a negative number. But again, I have this configured for subtraction. That way, it's just a bit more simple. Next is the amount of damage you want to do. Right now, what you can do is configure this pin to be the amount of damage you want. Example, let's say I want to do, 15 damage. We'll do that. And now the combinator is set to subtract 15 from our current HP stat. You can also wire it to something else, like a random generator chip, if you want it to be a bit more random, of course. Next, we must wire everything else. Right here on the set stat chip is the set. This is essentially telling the game when you want to set the stat. For now, we're going to have it whenever we enter the trigger zone. That way, as soon as you enter it, it is going to set your stat to whatever the value is. The value is going to be your HP stat subtracted by whatever you have. Therefore, right now it's negative 15. Of course, it's negative 15 because it didn't have a value. It's 0 because there's no player ID right now sending it a stat. But anyways, we're going to connect this, and I will show you an example of what it will do now. Now, I've started the game and my max HP is 1. Now that we're having it subtract 15 health, when I touch this, it will actually kill me due to the fact that my HP will be below 0. Ow. Ugh. What I've done here is instead of using a trigger zone, it's going to use a rangefinder. A rangefinder is like a laser pointer, so essentially whenever I get in the way of this laser, it's going to do damage. The issue is here, as long as I'm in the laser's area, it's going to keep outputting my ID. Therefore, it's going to keep setting my stat and it's going to essentially drain health. How can we fix that? How does a delay chip solve this problem? Well, it's actually quite simple. What we're going to do is get the player ID of the player and wire it to the signal to start the delay. What we're going to then do is configure it. You're going to set this green thing to 1/10 of a second. Essentially, what happens is that when this signal thing gets a constant number, as in when we're standing in the middle of the laser, it's going to keep outputting that player ID. Not a single time, it's going to keep outputting it. Therefore, when I stay in the laser, my ID is constantly output. Thing is, this is not going to constantly get signaled. The delay chip does not work like that. This is why we can use this to make it so whenever you enter the laser, it's a one-time thing. What we can then do is disconnect both the player and the set, and then attach all of them to the delay chip, and it will work. if you want to be really simple and instantly kill the player as soon as they get the ID, what you can easily do is simply get the ID, set it whenever it gets the ID, and simply set the value to 0, therefore not needing any delays, any get stats, or any combinators, just the set stat. Also, in this case, with a button, what you're going to want to do is get out your configure tool, and then configure the button. That way you send the player as signal output. That way it gets the ID instead of just the 1. You can get quite crazy with this and literally make your own gun. And yeah, that's about it for this tutorial on how to damage people with gadgets. You can also, as you saw, use this to make your own kind of weapons and traps. Have a good day!